I never thought a hole in my backyard would land me in the middle of a legal circus. But there I was, standing shin-deep in Georgia red clay while 3 police cars pulled up to my curb, like I was running some kind of underground criminal operation. My name is Patrick Zimmerman, and I had just moved to Meadowbrook Estates in suburban Atlanta 6 months prior. The neighborhood was one of those cookie-cutter developments where every house looked like it went through the same beige filter, and the HOA ruled with an iron fist wrapped in passive-aggressive newsletters. I should have seen the warning signs when I received a violation notice 2 weeks after moving in because my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Apparently, midnight black was acceptable, but my mailbox was more of a charcoal situation, which violated Section 4.7 of the Community Guidelines. But I loved the property itself. The house sat on a half-acre lot, which was generous for the area, and the backyard had this beautiful slope that was perfect for what I had been planning for years. I am a software engineer by trade, but my real passion has always been sustainable living and food preservation. Growing up in rural Montana, my grandmother had a root cellar where she stored vegetables, canned goods, and preserves that would last through the brutal winters. The smell of earth and potatoes, the cool temperature even in summer, the satisfaction of having provisions for any emergency. I wanted that for myself. So I hired a structural engineer, got my blueprints drawn up professionally, submitted everything to the county for permits, and waited the required 6 weeks for approval. The county inspector came out, looked at my plans, checked the property lines, verified that I was not going to hit any utility lines, and gave me the green light. I had done everything by the book, crossed every T and dotted every I. What I had not done was notify the HOA, because according to the county regulations and my deed, I did not need to. The root cellar was entirely underground except for the entrance. It was more than 50 feet from my house, and it did not violate any building codes or easements. The morning I started digging, I was up at dawn. I had rented a small excavator for the week, and my buddy from college, Marcus, had driven down from Chattanooga to help me out. Marcus was a carpenter with experience in all kinds of construction, and he owed me a favor from when I helped him debug the website for his custom furniture business. We had our coffee, went over the plans one more time, and fired up the excavator around 7 in the morning. The sound of the machine must have carried through the neighborhood, because by 7:30, I noticed curtains twitching in the windows of the house directly behind mine. That was where Linda Pemberton lived, the HOA president and the most notorious busybody in a 3-county radius. Linda was in her late 50s, had that haircut that seemed to be mandatory for women who asked to speak to managers, and wore her authority like a crown. She had introduced herself the week I moved in, welcomed me to the neighborhood, and then handed me a 3-ring binder containing the complete HOA guidelines, which she had helpfully tabbed and highlighted. I waved in her direction, trying to be friendly, but the curtains snapped shut immediately. I should have known then that trouble was brewing. By 9 in the morning, I had the rough outline of the cellar excavated. The plan was for a 12 by 14-foot underground room, about 8 feet deep, with reinforced concrete walls and a proper ventilation system. The entrance would be a slanted door at ground level, the kind you see in old farmhouses, leading down a set of stairs. Marcus was working on framing the entrance while I continued to dig, and we were making excellent progress. That was when Linda appeared at my back fence, clutching a clipboard and wearing an expression that could curdle milk. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the sound of the excavator. "Excuse me, Patrick." I shut off the machine and pulled off my work gloves, walking over to the fence. "Morning, Linda. What can I do for you? What exactly do you think you are doing?" She gestured at the hole in my yard like I had just dug up a mass grave. "Building a root cellar," I said, keeping my tone pleasant. "For food storage. It is going to be great once it is finished." Her eyes narrowed. "Did you get HOA approval for this project?" "I did not need to," I replied. "I got county approval, which is what is legally required. The structure is entirely within my property lines and does not violate any building codes." Linda's face was turning an interesting shade of red. "Everything in this neighborhood requires HOA approval. Everything. It is in the covenant. You cannot just dig giant holes in your yard without permission." I had actually read the covenant pretty carefully before buying the house, specifically because I had planned this project. The covenant covers visible structures and modifications. This is underground and will not be visible except for the entrance, which will be landscaped and barely noticeable. I made sure of that before I started. "That is not your decision to make," Linda snapped. "You need to stop this immediately and submit the proper paperwork to the HOA board. We meet next Thursday and you can present your case then." "Linda, with all due respect, I have already gotten the necessary approvals from the county. I am not stopping the project." I tried to keep my voice calm, but I could feel my patience wearing thin. She jabbed her pen at me. "You are in violation of the HOA covenant. If you do not stop, there will be consequences." "What consequences?" I asked. "Fines, legal action, whatever is necessary to maintain the standards of this community." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Marcus had wandered over during this exchange, and he gave me a sympathetic look. "HOA drama already, huh? Apparently." I sighed and pulled my gloves back on. "Let us just keep working. I have got all my paperwork in order. She cannot actually stop me." We worked for another 3 hours, getting the hole to the proper depth and starting on the drainage system that would keep the cellar dry. It was hard physical work, but satisfying. There was something primal about digging into the earth, creating something useful with your own hands. By noon, we were both sweaty and covered in red clay, ready for a lunch break. We had just sat down on my back porch with sandwiches when I heard the sirens. At first, I thought it was just emergency vehicles passing by on the main road. But then I saw the first police car pull into my driveway, followed by a second, and then a third. My stomach dropped. "You have got to be kidding me," Marcus muttered. I stood up as 2 officers approached from the side of the house. One was older, probably in his 50s, with gray hair and a weathered face. The other was younger, maybe late 20s, with the kind of eager expression that suggested he had not been on the force very long. "Patrick Zimmerman." The older officer called out. "That is me," I said, walking down the porch steps. "What is going on?" "We received a report of illegal excavation on this property. The caller stated you were digging without proper permits and creating a dangerous situation." He looked past me at the hole in my backyard. "That is quite an operation you have got going there." "I have all my permits," I said quickly. "This is completely legal. I got county approval for everything." The younger officer was already walking toward the excavation, his hand resting on his belt. "That is a pretty big hole, sir. What exactly are you building?" "A root cellar, for food storage." I could hear the frustration creeping into my voice. "I've got all the paperwork inside. Let me grab it." The older officer held up a hand. "Let us all just stay calm. We are going to need to see those permits, and we will probably need to call the county inspector to verify everything." As I turned to go inside, I saw Linda standing at her fence, talking to a woman I recognized as Brenda Hutchins, another HOA board member. They were both watching with barely concealed satisfaction, and I felt a surge of anger that I had to tamp down. Getting mad at the cops was not going to help anything. I retrieved the file folder that contained all my permits, blueprints, inspection reports, and correspondence with the county. I had organized everything meticulously because I knew there might be questions, though I had not anticipated the police getting involved. When I came back outside, there were now 4 officers on my property, and they were examining the excavation with serious expressions. "Here," I said, handing the folder to the older officer, whose name tag read Daniels. "Everything is in there. The permit from the county, the approval from the building inspector, the structural engineer's certification, all of it." Officer Daniels opened the folder and started flipping through the papers. His expression remained neutral, but I could see his partner, Officer Morrison according to his name tag, looking more skeptical. Behind them, a third officer was taking photos of the excavation site. "These look legitimate," Daniels said after a few minutes, "but I am going to need to call this in and verify with the county. In the meantime, I am going to have to ask you to stop work on the project." "For how long?" I asked. "Until we can confirm everything is in order." He walked a few feet away and pulled out his radio. Marcus had come down from the porch and was standing next to me, arms crossed. "This is insane, man. You did everything right." "I know," I muttered, "but that does not matter to Linda." We stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 minutes. I could hear Officer Daniels on his radio, giving my permit numbers and apparently talking to someone at the county offices. The other officers were measuring the distance from the excavation to my house and the property lines, taking more photos, and generally treating my backyard like a crime scene. Finally, Daniels walked back over. "Okay, Mr. Zimmerman, I spoke with the county building department. Your permits are valid and current. As far as they are concerned, you are in full compliance with all regulations." Relief washed over me. "So we can continue working?" "Technically, yes. However, the person who called this in mentioned that you might be in violation of your HOA covenant. That is a civil matter, not a criminal one, so it is not really our jurisdiction." He handed my folder back to me. "My advice would be to get this sorted out with your HOA before you continue. It will save you headaches down the road." "The HOA does not have authority over this," I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. "I checked before I started." Daniels shrugged. "That may be true, but if they decide to take legal action, you could end up in court. Just something to think about." After the police finally left, I walked straight to Linda's house. I was done playing nice. She answered the door with a smug expression that made me want to scream, but I kept my composure. "The police confirmed that all my permits are valid and that I am not doing anything illegal," I said without preamble. "You wasted their time and mine with a false report." "It was not a false report," Linda replied coolly. "You are in violation of the HOA covenant, and I have every right to report violations to the appropriate authorities. Calling the police and claiming I am doing illegal excavation when you know I have permits is not reporting a violation. It is harassment." Her expression hardened. "If you continue with this project without HOA approval, the board will have no choice but to take legal action. We will fine you, and if necessary, we will take you to court. This neighborhood has standards, Patrick, and you do not get to ignore them just because you think you know better." "I will see you in court then," I said and turned away before I said something I would regret. The next few days were tense. I continued working on the root cellar, determined not to let Linda's threats stop me. Marcus had to head back to Chattanooga, but he left me with detailed instructions on the next steps. I spent my evenings after work pouring the concrete foundation and installing the drainage system. It was backbreaking work doing it alone, but I was too stubborn to quit. True to her word, Linda sent me a formal violation notice 3 days after the police incident. The letter, which arrived via certified mail, informed me that I was in violation of Section 3.2 of the HOA covenant, which stated that any construction, excavation, or modification to a property that alters the natural topography or creates permanent structures must receive written approval from the HOA board prior to commencement of work. The fine was $500, with an additional $100 per day until the violation was corrected. I was also informed that if I did not cease work immediately, the HOA would pursue an injunction in county court. I immediately called my real estate attorney, Gerald Murphy, who had handled the closing on my house. Gerald was in his 60s, had been practicing real estate law for 40 years, and had seen every kind of HOA dispute imaginable. "Let me take a look at your covenant and your permits," he said after I explained the situation. "Email everything to me, and I will give you my assessment." 2 days later, Gerald called me back. "Okay, Patrick, here is the situation. Your permits are rock solid. The county has full authority over building regulations, and you are in complete compliance. However, the HOA covenant is a bit murky on this issue. Section 3.2 could be interpreted to include underground structures, even though it is not explicitly stated." "So what does that mean?" I asked. "It means that if the HOA takes you to court, they might have a case, or they might not. It would depend on the judge's interpretation of the covenant. The good news is that you can argue that you acted in good faith based on the covenant's language, and that the structure is minimally invasive. The bad news is that litigation could drag on for months and cost you thousands in legal fees, even if you win." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. "What do you recommend?" "Honestly, try to negotiate with the HOA, see if you can get retroactive approval. Show them your plans, explain the project, and emphasize that it is not going to be an eyesore or affect property values. Most of these boards are reasonable once they understand what you are doing." "You have not met Linda Pemberton," I said. Gerald chuckled. "I have met plenty of Linda Pembertons. They are tough, but they usually respond to logic and documentation. Put together a presentation, request a hearing with the board, and make your case. If that does not work, we can talk about your legal options." So that is what I did. I spent the next week preparing for the HOA board meeting. I put together a detailed presentation with photos of similar root cellars, documentation showing that they did not decrease property values, testimonials from homeowners in other states who had built similar structures, and of course, all my permits and engineering reports. I even included a landscape plan showing how the entrance would be hidden with native plants and a decorative stone border. The board meeting was held at Linda's house, which felt like enemy territory. The board consisted of Linda, Brenda Hutchins, a retired accountant named Robert Chen, and a younger woman named Michelle Torres who worked in marketing. They sat on one side of Linda's dining room table, and I sat on the other, feeling like I was on trial. Linda called the meeting to order with all the formality of a Supreme Court hearing. "We are here to address the violation notice issued to Patrick Zimmerman regarding unauthorized excavation and construction at his property. Mr. Zimmerman, you have requested the opportunity to present your case to the board. You have 15 minutes. I launched into my presentation, walking them through every aspect of the project. I explained the history and purpose of root cellars, showed them my engineering reports, emphasized that the structure would be barely visible, and pointed out that I had obtained all legally required permits. I was calm, professional, and thorough when I finished, There was silence. Robert Chen was flipping through the documents I had provided, looking thoughtful. Michelle Torres seemed genuinely interested and had asked several good questions during my presentation. Brenda Hutchins just looked confused, like she was not sure what to make of any of this. Linda, however, looked unmoved. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. The board will deliberate and provide you with a decision within 7 business days." "Can I ask what your concerns are?" I said. "I mean, specifically, what about this project bothers the board?" Linda pursed her lips. "This neighborhood has a certain aesthetic. We have worked very hard to maintain property values and ensure that all homes meet our standards. When residents start digging large holes in their yards and building underground bunkers, it sends a message that we are not a well-maintained community." "It is not a bunker," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "It is a root cellar, and it will not be visible once it is completed and landscaped. Nobody driving by will even know it is there." "That is not the point," Linda said. "The point is that you did not follow proper procedures. You did not seek approval from the board before starting construction, and that is a violation of our covenant." "I did not think I needed to," I said. "The covenant says visible structures require approval. This will not be visible." "The covenant says any construction or excavation," Linda shot back. "That is clearly what you are doing." Robert Chen cleared his throat. "Linda, I think Patrick makes some valid points. His permits are in order, the structure will be minimally visible, and he has clearly put a lot of thought into this. I am not sure we have grounds to deny this retroactively." "We absolutely have grounds," Linda said sharply. "He violated the covenant by not seeking approval first." "That is black and white." Michelle Torres spoke up for the first time since my presentation ended. "But if we had been presented with this plan before he started, would we have approved it? I mean, looking at everything he has shown us, I do not see a reason to deny it." "That is not the question," Linda said. "The question is whether he followed the rules, and he did not." The meeting ended without a resolution, and I left feeling frustrated and exhausted. 7 days later, I received the board's decision in the mail. By a vote of 3-1, they had denied my request for retroactive approval. The letter, signed by Linda, stated that I was required to fill in the excavation, restore the yard to its original condition, and pay the accumulated fines, which now totaled $1,200. I called Gerald immediately. "They denied it. They want me to fill in the cellar and pay over $1,000 in fines." "Who voted against you?" Gerald asked. "Linda, Brenda, and I am guessing one other person. Michelle seemed supportive and Robert was at least reasonable." "Okay, here is what we are going to do. We are going to file a response contesting the violation and requesting binding arbitration. Georgia law allows for arbitration in HOA disputes, and it is usually faster and cheaper than going to court. In the meantime, continue working on your project. Do not let them intimidate you into stopping." "Are you sure?" I asked. "What if they get an injunction?" "They will not get an injunction. No judge is going to issue one when you have valid county permits and the structure is not causing any immediate harm. Trust me on this." So I kept working. I finished the concrete walls, installed the ventilation system, and began work on the entrance. Every day, I expected another letter from the HOA or another visit from the police, but nothing came. The silence was almost worse than the confrontation because I knew Linda was plotting something. 2 weeks later, I was working on the entrance stairway when my engineer, Tom Bradford, stopped by to check on the progress. Tom was in his 40s, had been a structural engineer for 20 years, and had designed everything from residential foundations to commercial high-rises. He had been enthusiastic about the root cellar project from the beginning, and had even offered some design suggestions that improved the ventilation and structural integrity. "Looking good, Patrick," Tom said, climbing down into the partially completed cellar. "You have done excellent work on this. The drainage is perfect, the walls are solid. This thing is going to last 100 years. "Thanks," I said. "I just hope I get to finish it before the HOA buries me in legal fees." Tom laughed. "Yeah, I heard about your battle with the neighborhood Nazis. Do not worry too much about it. You have got all your permits, and I will testify in any legal proceeding that this structure is safe and up to code. They do not have a leg to stand on." We were discussing the final steps for the entrance when I heard voices from my backyard. I climbed out of the cellar to find Linda and Brenda standing near my fence, along with two men in suits I did not recognize. "Can I help you?" I called out. Linda pointed at the cellar. "These gentlemen are from the County Code Enforcement Office. They are here to inspect your excavation." My stomach tightened, but Tom climbed out of the cellar behind me and extended his hand to the two men. "Tom Bradford, structural engineer. I designed this root cellar and certified all the plans. Everything is in compliance with county code." The two men introduced themselves as inspectors from the county building department. They seemed professional but cautious, clearly not wanting to be caught in the middle of an HOA dispute. "We received a complaint that the structure being built here might not match the approved plans," one of them said. "We need to verify that everything is being constructed according to the permits." "Absolutely," I said. "Let me get the blueprints." For the next hour, Tom and I walked the inspectors through every aspect of the cellar, comparing the actual construction to the approved plans. Tom answered their technical questions with ease, pointing out how we had actually exceeded the minimum requirements in several areas. The inspectors took measurements, examined the drainage system, checked the ventilation, and reviewed the structural reinforcements. Linda and Brenda watched from a distance, whispering to each other. I could tell Linda was hoping the inspectors would find some violation, some reason to shut down the project. But Tom's work was flawless, and I had followed the plans to the letter. Finally, the lead inspector closed his notebook. "Everything looks good, Mr. Zimmerman. You are in full compliance with your permits. Nice work, actually. You do not see many people taking this much care with their projects." "Thank you," I said, relief flooding through me. Linda stepped forward. "But what about the fact that he did not get HOA approval? Doesn't not that matter?" The inspector looked at her with barely concealed annoyance. "Madam, HOA approval is not our jurisdiction. We enforce county building codes, and this structure meets all those requirements. If you have a dispute with your homeowners association, that is a civil matter. You will need to resolve it through your own channels." After they left, Linda shot me a look that could have melted steel. "This is not over," she hissed before stalking away. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "That woman has some serious issues. But you are in the clear as far as the county is concerned. Keep building." The arbitration hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, I completed the root cellar. The entrance was finished with beautiful stonework that blended into the landscape. I planted native shrubs around it and added a small garden bed that made the whole area look intentional and attractive. The interior of the cellar was everything I had hoped for. Cool, dry, with sturdy shelving lining the walls and a proper ventilation system that kept the air fresh. I started stocking it with preserved foods, root vegetables, and canned goods. It was perfect. The day before the arbitration hearing, I was testing the ventilation system when I noticed Linda in my backyard. She had not knocked on my door or announced her presence. She was just standing there, staring at the cellar entrance with an expression I could not quite read. "Linda," I called out, startling her. "Can I help you?" She turned to face me, and for a moment I thought I saw something almost like sadness in her eyes, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual stern expression. "I was just observing the violation," she said stiffly. "It is not a violation," I said, walking over to her. "Linda, why are you so opposed to this? I mean, really. What about this root cellar bothers you so much?" She was quiet for a long moment, and I thought she might not answer. Then she said, "When I first moved to this neighborhood 20 years ago, it was new. Every house was perfect. Every yard was pristine. We all worked together to maintain standards. Over the years, I have watched this place slowly deteriorate. People putting up ugly fences, painting their houses ridiculous colors, letting their lawns die. Nobody cares anymore about maintaining the vision we started with. But I do care," I said. "That is why I spent months planning this project, why I hired an engineer, why I got all the proper permits. I am not trying to trash the neighborhood. I am trying to build something useful and beautiful." "It is a hole in the ground," Linda said flatly. "And once you get away with it, everyone else will want to do whatever they want. The standards will disappear, and this will become just another run-down subdivision. Or," I said gently, "people will see that it is possible to do creative projects that enhance your property without destroying the neighborhood's character. Linda, I understand you want to protect this place, but you cannot control everything, and you should not have to. Trust your neighbors to make good decisions." She looked at me for a long moment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I had gotten through to her, but then she shook her head. "I will see you at the arbitration hearing," she said, and walked away. The hearing was held in a conference room at a local legal office. The arbitrator was a retired judge named Harold Freeman who specialized in HOA disputes. He was in his 70s, with a grandfatherly demeanor that immediately put me at ease. Gerald sat next to me on one side of the table, while Linda, Brenda, and the HOA's lawyer, a stern woman named Patricia Wells, sat on the other. Judge Freeman opened the hearing by explaining the process. "This is binding arbitration, which means that both parties have agreed to accept my decision as final. I have reviewed the materials submitted by both sides, and I have a few questions before I make my determination." He turned to me first. "Mr. Zimmerman, explain to me why you believed you did not need HOA approval for this project." I walked him through my reasoning, citing the specific language in the covenant that referred to visible structures and my interpretation that an underground cellar did not fall into that category. I also pointed out that the entrance, once landscaped, was minimal and aesthetically pleasing. Judge Freeman nodded thoughtfully, making notes. Then he turned to Linda. "Mrs. Pemberton, explain the HOA's position." Linda launched into a passionate speech about the importance of maintaining neighborhood standards and the necessity of having rules that everyone follows. She argued that allowing me to bypass the approval process would set a dangerous precedent and undermine the HOA's authority. "But," Judge Freeman interrupted, "did Mr. Zimmerman actually violate the covenant? I have read Section 3.2 several times, and I am not entirely clear on whether an underground structure would be covered." Patricia Wells, the HOA's lawyer, spoke up. "Your Honor, the language says any construction or excavation that alters the natural topography. Mr. Zimmerman clearly excavated and altered the topography of his yard. But the same section also emphasizes visible modifications," Gerald countered. "And the root cellar, once completed, is barely visible. Mr. Zimmerman also acted in good faith, obtaining all legally required permits before beginning work." Judge Freeman held up a hand. "I would like to see this root cellar myself before making a decision. I am going to schedule a site visit for tomorrow morning." The next morning, Judge Freeman arrived at my house at 9 o'clock sharp. Gerald and I met him in the driveway, while Linda, Brenda, and Patricia Wells arrived moments later. Tom Bradford had also agreed to come and provide technical expertise if needed. I led everyone to the backyard, and we approached the root cellar entrance. I had spent the previous evening making sure everything was perfect, and the landscaping looked beautiful in the morning light. Judge Freeman examined the entrance carefully, walked around the perimeter, and then asked to see inside. We climbed down the stairs into the cellar, and I could see his expression change from skeptical to impressed. The interior was clean, well lit, and clearly well constructed. Tom pointed out the structural features, the ventilation system, and the drainage setup. "This is remarkable work," Judge Freeman said. "Mr. Zimmerman, did you do this yourself?" "Most of it, yes, sir," I said, "with some help from a friend and guidance from Tom here." We spent about 30 minutes in and around the cellar while Judge Freeman asked questions. He wanted to know about the cost, the time investment, the purpose, and whether I planned to do any other projects. He also walked the property lines to verify that the structure was entirely within my lot and not encroaching on any easements. Linda remained silent during most of this, but I could see her jaw getting tighter and tighter. When we climbed back out of the cellar, Judge Freeman turned to her. "Mrs. Pemberton, what specifically about this structure do you find objectionable?" "It is not about the structure itself," Linda said. "It is about the process. He did not follow the rules." "But if he had come to the HOA board before starting, would you have approved it?" Judge Freeman asked pointedly. Linda hesitated. "That is not the point." "Actually, it is precisely the point," Judge Freeman said. "If the HOA would have approved this project had Mr. Zimmerman followed the proper procedure, then we are really just talking about a procedural violation, not a substantive one." We reconvened at the legal office that afternoon for Judge Freeman's decision. He did not waste time with preliminaries. "I have reviewed all the evidence, visited the property, and considered the arguments from both sides. Here is my determination. Mr. Zimmerman's root cellar does not violate the substantive provisions of the HOA covenant. The structure is minimally visible, professionally constructed, and does not negatively impact the neighborhood's character or property values. However, Mr. Zimmerman did fail to follow the procedural requirement of seeking HOA approval before beginning construction." My heart sank. This sounded like he was ruling against me. "That said," Judge Freeman continued, "I find that the HOA acted unreasonably in demanding that the structure be removed and in assessing excessive fines. A procedural violation of this nature should result in a nominal penalty, not the destruction of a properly permitted structure. Therefore, my ruling is as follows. Mr. Zimmerman will pay a one-time fine of $250 to the HOA for failing to seek prior approval. The HOA will grant retroactive approval for the root cellar and will cease all further fines or legal action related to this project. Both parties will bear their own legal costs." I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. $250 was nothing compared to what the HOA had been demanding, and I got to keep my cellar. Linda looked like she had been slapped. "Your Honor, this sets a terrible precedent. Other homeowners will think they can just do whatever they want and ask for forgiveness later." "Mrs. Pemberton," Judge Freeman said firmly, "this ruling is specific to the facts of this case. Mr. Zimmerman acted in good faith, obtained proper permits, and created a structure that enhances rather than detracts from his property. I would hope that your board would encourage this kind of thoughtful, well-planned improvement rather than trying to punish it. My decision is final." After the hearing, Gerald and I walked out to the parking lot together. "Congratulations," he said. "You won." It does not feel like much of a victory, I admitted. I still have to pay a fine and Linda is going to hate me forever. Linda was going to hate you regardless, Gerald said with a laugh. At least now you have your root cellar and legal peace of mind. That is what matters. I went home that evening feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. The battle had taken months out of my life and cost me thousands in legal fees, even though both sides were supposed to bear their own costs. But I had my cellar, and that was what mattered. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. Neighbors started stopping by to see the root cellar. Word had spread about the arbitration, and people were curious. I gave tours to at least a dozen families, explaining the construction process, the purpose, and the benefits of having a space for food storage and preservation. One of those neighbors was Michelle Torres, the HOA board member who had seemed sympathetic during my hearing. She came by on a Saturday afternoon with her husband and 2 kids. "I have to admit," she said after seeing the cellar, "this is really cool. I had no idea what you were building, but this is actually amazing." "Thanks," I said. "I wish I had done a better job explaining it to the board from the beginning. Maybe it would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." "I do not think it would have mattered," Michelle said quietly. "Linda was determined to stop you no matter what. She has been on that board for 15 years and she has gotten more and more rigid over time. A lot of people in the neighborhood are pretty fed up with her, to be honest." "Really?" I said, surprised. "Oh yeah. She fines people for the tiniest things. Last month she tried to fine the Johnsons because their Halloween decorations were up for 3 days longer than the covenant technically allows. She is making people miserable." "That is too bad," I said. "I mean, I understand wanting to maintain standards, but there has to be a balance." "Exactly," Michelle said. "Actually, a bunch of us have been talking about running for the board in the next election. If we can get enough reasonable people on there, we can start making some changes." The next HOA board election was 6 months away, and I watched with interest as a slate of reform candidates emerged. Michelle Torres was running for president, along with several other neighbors who wanted to see a more flexible, common-sense approach to neighborhood governance. Linda, of course, was running for re-election, along with Brenda and one other incumbent. The campaign was surprisingly contentious for a neighborhood HOA election. Linda sent out multiple mailings warning about the dangers of radical change and the need to maintain our standards. The reform candidates countered with messages about trust, reasonableness, and treating homeowners like adults rather than children. I did not get directly involved in the campaign, but I let people know that I supported the reform candidates. Several of them had visited my root cellar and understood that you could have both reasonable standards and individual freedom. On election night, about 200 homeowners showed up at the community center for the vote count. That was an unprecedented turnout for an HOA election. When the results were announced, the reform candidates had won in a landslide. Michelle Torres was the new HOA president, and 3 other reform candidates had won board seats. Linda had been voted out after 15 years. I ran into Linda a few weeks after the election at the neighborhood grocery store. I almost did not recognize her at first because she looked smaller somehow, diminished. She was pushing a cart with just a few items, and when she saw me, she actually looked like she might turn around and leave. "Linda," I said, approaching her. "How are you?" She looked at me warily. "I am fine. Congratulations on your victory, I suppose. You got what you wanted." "I just wanted to build my root cellar," I said. "I never wanted a war." "Well, you got both," she said. "And now the neighborhood is going to fall apart without proper oversight." "Or maybe it will be fine," I said gently. "Maybe even better. People still care about this place, Linda. They just want to be trusted to make their own decisions. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw that sadness in her eyes again. I gave 15 years to that board. I was just trying to protect what we built here. I know, I said, but sometimes protecting something means knowing when to let go. She nodded slowly, said goodbye, and walked away. I felt bad for her, despite everything. She had genuinely believed she was doing the right thing, even if her methods had become tyrannical over time. The new HOA board made a lot of changes. They streamlined the approval process, reduced fines for minor violations, and established a more transparent system for how decisions were made. They also updated the covenant to clarify which types of projects required board approval and which did not. Underground structures like my root cellar were specifically exempted from the approval process as long as they met county building codes. My root cellar became something of a legend in the neighborhood. People would point it out to visitors as an example of what you could do with creativity and proper planning. A few other homeowners even built their own versions, though none were quite as extensive as mine. 2 years after the arbitration hearing, I was working in my garden on a spring morning when I heard a knock on the front door. When I answered, I found a young couple standing there, looking nervous. "Hi," the woman said. "We are sorry to bother you, but we just bought the house 3 streets over and we heard about your root cellar. We were wondering if we could see it. We are interested in building something similar." I smiled and invited them in. As I walked them back to the cellar, giving them the tour I had given so many times before, I felt a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with winning against the HOA. I had built something useful, something that would last, something that might inspire others to think creatively about their own properties. The root cellar ended up being everything I had hoped for. I used it to store vegetables from my garden, preserved foods, and even some wine that I had started making as a hobby. On hot summer days, it was a cool refuge. During a power outage the following winter, it proved its worth when my refrigerated food stayed perfectly fresh in the cellar's natural cold. But more than that, the whole experience taught me something about standing up for what you believe in, even when you face opposition. I could have given in to Linda's demands, filled in the cellar, and avoided the whole legal mess. But I knew I was right. I had done everything by the book, and I was not going to be bullied into destroying something I had worked so hard to create. It also taught me that communities are complicated. Linda was not a villain, despite how she acted. She was someone who cared deeply about her neighborhood but had lost perspective over the years. The other homeowners were not apathetic. They had just been waiting for someone to stand up and show that there was another way to handle things. I still live in Meadowbrook Estates, and I plan to stay here for a long time. My relationship with the HOA is now friendly and collaborative. When I wanted to install solar panels on my roof last year, I submitted my plans to the board. They reviewed them in a week, and I got approval without any drama. That is how it should work. Sometimes I go down into my root cellar just to sit in the cool darkness and think. The smell of earth and stored vegetables reminds me of my grandmother's cellar in Montana, and I feel connected to that tradition of self-sufficiency and preparation. I think about how close I came to losing this, how a different arbitrator might have ruled differently, how I might have given up if the fight had gone on much longer. But I did not give up, and here I am, surrounded by shelves of preserved food and the satisfaction of having built something with my own hands. The root cellar is more than just a storage space. It is a reminder that sometimes you have to dig deep, literally and figuratively, to create something meaningful. It is a testament to the importance of following proper procedures without losing sight of common sense and reason. And it is proof that even in the face of unreasonable opposition, doing the right thing and standing your ground can pay off. The entrance to my root cellar is nestled among flowering shrubs and native plants, barely visible unless you know what to look for. The stone work around the door has weathered beautifully, taking on a patina that makes it look like it has always been there. When I open the angled door and descend the steps into the cool interior, I am entering a space that represents not just practicality, but perseverance. On the shelves that line the walls, I have carefully organized my provisions. Glass jars of tomatoes, pickles, and jams catch the light from the ventilation shafts. Bins of potatoes, carrots, and onions are arranged by type and harvest date. There is a section for emergency supplies, another for my wine-making equipment, and even a small area where I keep some camping gear and tools. Friends and family visit regularly now, and the root cellar is always one of the highlights of the tour. My parents came down from Montana last fall and were amazed at what I had built. My dad, who had helped his own father build a similar structure decades ago, walked through with tears in his eyes. "You kept the tradition going," he said, running his hand along the smooth concrete walls. "Your great-grandfather would be proud." That meant more to me than any legal victory ever could. The arbitration with the HOA concluded with that $250 fine, which I paid immediately and without complaint. It was a small price to pay for peace and the right to keep my cellar. In a strange way, I was grateful for the whole experience. It forced me to document everything meticulously, to understand my rights as a homeowner, and to connect with neighbors I might never have met otherwise. Tom Bradford, the engineer who designed the cellar, still stops by occasionally to check on his handiwork. He brings colleagues sometimes, using my cellar as an example of proper underground construction in presentations and classes. He has joked that I should charge him a consulting fee, but I am just happy that something I built might help others learn. The legal precedent from my case has actually helped other homeowners in similar situations. Gerald told me about 2 other cases in Georgia, where people cited Judge Freeman's ruling in my arbitration to support their own projects. The idea that well-planned, properly permitted structures should be evaluated on their merits rather than rejected on technicalities is slowly gaining traction in HOA law. Linda Pemberton moved out of Meadowbrook Estates about a year after losing her board position. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband retired to Florida, looking for a fresh start. I genuinely wish her well. Our conflict was never personal, at least not from my side, and I hope she found some peace in her new community. The new HOA board, under Michelle Torres's leadership, has transformed the neighborhood's culture. There are still rules and standards, but they are applied with common sense and flexibility. When the Hendersons wanted to paint their house a slightly different shade of blue than what was technically allowed, the board looked at samples, consulted with neighbors, and approved it because it looked good. That never would have happened under Linda's regime. I have learned that most people, when given the freedom and trust to make good decisions, will do exactly that. The neighborhood has not fallen apart without Linda's iron fist. If anything, it is more vibrant and friendly than ever. People feel empowered to improve their properties, to express their creativity, and to invest in their homes without fear of arbitrary punishment. My root cellar stands as a physical reminder of all these lessons. Every time I open those doors and descend into the cool darkness, I am reminded that fighting for what is right, even when it is difficult, is always worth it. I am reminded that preparation and planning pay off, that professional guidance is invaluable, and that sometimes you need to stand alone before others will stand with you. The cellar itself continues to serve its purpose beautifully. This past summer, I grew my most productive garden yet, and the cellar is now packed with the bounty. I have been teaching myself more about fermentation and preservation, experimenting with kimchi, sauerkraut, and other fermented vegetables that thrive in the cellar's consistent temperature. It has become not just a storage space, but a laboratory for learning traditional food preservation techniques. I have also started hosting small workshops for neighbors who want to learn about food preservation and sustainable living. About once a month, a group of 8 to 10 people comes over, and we spend an afternoon canning, fermenting, or just talking about self-sufficiency strategies. The root cellar serves as both classroom and inspiration, showing people what is possible when you combine traditional wisdom with modern engineering. These gatherings have created a sense of community that I never expected when I first moved to Meadowbrook Estates. People share garden produce, trade preservation recipes, and support each other's projects. Someone is always building or improving something, and instead of fear and violation notices, there is excitement and encouragement. Last month, Tom and I were featured in a local magazine article about sustainable home improvements. The photographer spent hours getting the perfect shots of the root cellar, and the article explained the entire journey from concept to completion, including the HOA dispute. The response was overwhelming. I received emails and messages from people all over the state asking for advice on their own projects. One message that particularly touched me came from a woman in Savannah who was fighting her own HOA battle over a greenhouse she wanted to build. She said my story gave her the courage to keep fighting, to trust that doing things the right way would ultimately prevail. 6 months later, she sent me a photo of her completed greenhouse with a note that said simply, "Thank you for not giving up." That is when I realized the root cellar's impact extended far beyond my backyard. It had become a symbol of the right to improve your property, to pursue your passions, and to resist unreasonable authority. People were not just inspired by the structure itself, but by the story of how it came to be. The financial cost of the legal battle was significant. Several $1,000s in attorney fees, the arbitration costs, and countless hours of my time preparing documents and presentations. But I have never regretted a single dollar or minute spent. The principle was worth fighting for, and the outcome has enriched my life in ways I never anticipated. My career as a software engineer has also benefited from the experience in unexpected ways. The attention to detail, the importance of documentation, and the need to communicate complex ideas clearly are all skills that transferred directly to my professional work. I found myself better equipped to handle difficult clients, to stand firm on technical decisions, and to navigate corporate politics with the same determination I showed in dealing with the HOA. As I write this, sitting at the entrance to my root cellar on a cool October evening, I can see the sun setting over the neighborhood. The leaves are starting to turn, and there is a hint of wood smoke in the air. Inside the cellar below me are dozens of jars of applesauce made from fruit I picked at a local orchard, bins of sweet potatoes and winter squash from my garden, and wheels of hard cheese I am aging as part of my latest hobby. The cellar represents security in an uncertain world. Whatever challenges come, whatever disruptions to supply chains or economic upheavals, I have months' worth of food stored in a cool, dry, secure location. But more than that, it represents autonomy, the right to prepare for the future in my own way, to invest my labor into something permanent and useful. I think about how different things would be if I had backed down when Linda first confronted me over my fence, if I had stopped digging when the police arrived, if I had given in to the HOA's demands. I would have lost more than just a root cellar. I would have lost confidence in my own judgment, faith in the system, and the respect of my neighbors. Instead, I gained all of those things. I learned that the system can work if you engage with it properly, that most people are reasonable when presented with facts and logic, and that standing up for yourself often inspires others to do the same. The root cellar will outlast me. The concrete walls are designed to last a century or more, and the structure requires minimal maintenance. Whoever owns this house after me will inherit not just a storage space, but a piece of history, a reminder that one person willing to fight for what is right can make a lasting difference. As darkness settles over the neighborhood, I close the cellar doors and secure them for the night. The plants around the entrance rustle in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, I can hear children playing. It is a peaceful scene, a far cry from the tension and conflict of 2 years ago. I walk back to my house, satisfied with a day well spent. Tomorrow, I will probably go down into the cellar to check on the cheese and rotate some of the stored vegetables. I might give another tour to a curious neighbor, or answer questions from someone planning their own project. The cellar has become woven into the fabric of my daily life, as natural and essential as my kitchen or workshop. The journey from that first morning when I fired up the excavator to now has been long and sometimes difficult, but absolutely worth it. I built more than a root cellar in my backyard. I built a testament to perseverance, proper planning, and the power of standing firm in your convictions. And every time I open those doors and descend into the cool earth below, I am reminded that the best victories are the ones you have to fight for.